Welcome back to my YouTube. I am Madison and this is Planet with Madison. And this is where I show you how to avoid the 3 killers of wealth, which are taxes, market loss, and inflation. And all of this is to hedge against the depreciation of the dollar, protect yourself against a tumultuous market, and to keep more of what you make. So if you are a business owner, a 1099, or a W-2 with a side hustle, you have come to the right place. So let's get into it.
I started in the financial industry about...
Today, I want to go off of my last video, and this is about whether or not to be or not to be in the system. Because I think that's kind of the question that most of us are grappling with, right? I think a lot of us are in the same boat where we are feeling very nihilistic. And then this has nothing to do with existentialism or God or anything, but what this does have to do with is why bother trying when you keep being shoved down? I can't tell you how many calls I hop on with people where they're talking about how they just feel they're in this hamster wheel. They're in the crabs in the bucket, the slow boiling water, frogs, whatever you want to refer to as far as metaphor is concerned. They feel like, why bother trying? There's no point trying if you can't get ahead, you can't get out of your situation, and you're stuck. So what I'm addressing today is what is causing that feeling of nihilism, right? We've already addressed how our system came to be, and I think people now are grappling with, well, like, okay, that's the system, I've accepted it for what it is, but what to do about it? I understand exactly how it feels to be angry, to know that there's something going on and not know what to do about it. And you don't want to be some of those weirdo red pillars online who are saying, we need to go to war, we need to get our guns, and okay, that's fine, maybe, yes, maybe, but there are other options. Maybe it comes in the form of changing policy, maybe. But again, you can spend your whole life trying to change policy just for it to be undone with the next person. And the law is something that has become very ambiguous to the point where it's not very well understood. It has become something that is manipulatable, and so you just fawn, right? The stress response becomes then fawn. You can't run, you can't fight, so you fawn, which is essentially nihilism. Why bother trying? I'm just going to lay here and not bother. And a lot of us in our financial positions feel that way, and I don't think it's because, oh, we're just not saving, oh, we're just not putting money toward retirement, oh, we're just bad with our money. Maybe to a point, and I do think the system works against us in the form of hyper-consumerism, and we're using our phones all the time and have access to TV and ads, constant stimulus. I don't think that helps. I do think we can do something about that for sure. But again, system's kind of working against us. So what do we do about it in the form of, do we stay in the system? Do we get out of the system? And what my approach is and why. To be or not to be in the system, that is the question. Let's address what it looks like not being in the system. And I'm actually gonna categorize this into 2 different subcategories of individuals that I have seen doing the not in the system thing. Number 1, it's the nomad. Okay, you don't actually live anywhere, you don't actually own anything. You're rolling with the 2030 agenda and you just take it to heart, right? Everything's in an offshore account, you're a non-citizen national, you have 10 different passports, your family's going from country to country to country, you're always traveling, you have no stability, and again, you're not traceable, and you're using Bitcoin, the modern Trojan horse in my opinion, and that's what you are, is everything's digital, and maybe you want to be on the blockchain, and that's what you do. Number 1. Number 2 is the red pill off-gridding homesteader. I actually tried this to a point. I had a taste of it back in 2020. I kind of started to see what was going on, and I thought it was one big smoke screen, and come to find out, COVID really was a social experiment. And so at the time, I was like, well, we're gonna get chickens, we're gonna go 2 hours south, is kind of off grid, but not really. I think the entire high school didn't even have as much kids as my graduating class, so small town. I had my second baby at home. I've tried this. So this I can give real-time perspective on, and here's what I will say on that. I didn't have a lot of support from my spouse. He was in Alaska while I was home with a toddler and a newborn doing everything myself. So, it's a little relative, and I'm not gonna discount anybody else's experiences if they're like Ballerina Farms, who has a lot of money and a very supportive spouse and hired hands, okay? It's a very different perspective. And I don't think what you see online is reality. There is a lot of smoke and mirrors, and things are very glamorized when it comes to the homesteading world. What I will say is I was grimy and dirty every day, working from sun up to sundown. I was exhausted, no time for sleep, because if you sleep, the animals die. There's no rest, and it's very difficult. So what I learned from that experience is that it does take money and it does take community. So when you see Ballerina Farms, that is the reality for them. And money and a support system, hired help, is what you will need to manage that type of lifestyle. Assuming you're also offering things to the public. Now, I'm going to get into this because we do see people who do the out of the system thing in real time very well. I would say the Amish do it very well. However, when the Amish, for example, a couple years back, I think were providing raw milk or something. Don't quote me on this. I've got to get the resource. I'll put it back. I'll put it in the bottom of the YouTube. But they were providing, I think, raw milk or something to the public, right? Sell to the public because you need to bring in money into your community to build your community. Cool. So there's still a degree of like being in the system where you still have to have some form of economic exchange. But when you start to involve the public outside of your own community, what you've decided to do for religious purposes, then the federal government, the state government can bring down the hammer. So they had gotten in trouble. Their operation was shut down because of what they were selling to the public wasn't in accordance with public policy. The issue becomes when you start to involve the public. So if you still need money and you're trying to do the off-grid thing, good luck, because you're walking a fine line with the federal government and the state government, and it is going to be a battle. The other person I saw, this was again a personal experience, I went and visited an Airbnb, and it was down in southern Utah, and they had these Airbnbs built into caves, and the entire thing was completely off-grid. Like solar panel run, the way their water system was set up, they were right by the Colorado River, like they had the setup, and you could tell they had the setup. Even like the gates getting into their community was solar paneled. So everything was off, like they weren't using anything, right? I don't even know if they had, maybe they did have Wi-Fi, but even then everything had its own system, like homemade battery type shit. And I noticed that, I was like, oh, I see what they're doing. They are running an Airbnb, but if shit hit the fan, they would use their Airbnb to live on as a community. Gotcha. So they had 1 foot in and 1 foot out, where I'm sure they're, running their Airbnb business, but come to find out their Airbnb business is their what if something happens, what if shit hits the fan backup plan. But in the meantime, it's an Airbnb, right? So they have a business, they're working the system, they're in the system, but they're also out of the system. I think that is very smart and very strategic. And my approach is actually 1 foot in the system, 1 foot out of the system, just in case. Always good to have a low risk backup plan, right? Or even a backup plan that makes you money. So into what the system actually looks like. So now what does being in the system look like? And obviously we're all very familiar with this. You are watching YouTube. I'm filming this from my phone. We have laptops, we have TVs, we are very overly informed, well-informed, if you will, hyper-consumerism. There's Walmart down the road, there's Macy's down the road, but Amazon's delivered to your door, Instacart's delivered to your door, a life of comfort, okay? The modern system offers a life of comfort. At what cost, at what expense? That is what we're starting to experience, whether it be our actual brains, our actual capacity to think, our water reserves with ChatGPT, whether it be, maybe it's the modern handcuffs of debt. Some people argue that debt is wealth now, right? The more debt you have, the more wealthy you are because it's non-taxable. But then again, at what cost when it's all called in? Okay, so let's take the example of trying to purchase a home. If you don't pay taxes to the IRS, you can't prove income to the bank. If you don't prove income to the bank, you have to utilize other options. Let's say you're doing a bank statement only loan. When you do that, the interest rate is going to be double, meaning the money is more expensive. In that case, you might as well go through a private lender. You go through a private lender, there is less stability, less insurance. There's not as much backing. They could take you for what you're worth. The contract could be ambiguous, and hopefully there are contracts involved. I have experienced using private investment lending with real estate and losing over 6 figures. It is not fun. Going through the bank, there is some guarantee, there is some stability. Even if it's shaky stability, as we've addressed with the Federal Reserve and the system and what's going on, and we can go into modern events, but the bank has stability. So if you don't pay your taxes, you can't get a loan, you can't get a home, and good luck paying it all in cash at this point and sinking everything into a property that may or may not pay you back in the next couple years. So that's the system. If you don't pay your taxes, you don't have access to the bank, credit card companies, and everything tied into the system. Okay, so how do we work around this? Because my approach with this video is to play the game until you can't. I mentioned this Airbnb owner because I found it very wise. They had Airbnbs, they were bringing in cash flow, they had a working business, they're utilizing the tax code to their advantage, likely purchased an inexpensive piece of property. They could even have bought it wholesale from a direct buyer. They're working the system. That's an example of working the system. So I wanted to give an example because I don't know what your approach is gonna be, and I'm not gonna give you the one size fits all, I do everything in-house. There's things that you've got to figure out for yourself and what makes sense for your lifestyle. What I do is to help you strategize the structure and the tax planning and the financial planning so that you can be this Airbnb owner with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So the question to be in the system or not to be in the system, for now, it's both. Both because we see the problems with the accumulation of wealth into the pockets of few, paying pedophiles that are not being held accountable for what they are doing, sending our tax dollars to other countries, and a legal system that doesn't protect its citizens. There are problems. There are problems that we are funding with our tax dollars. So when the country began in 1776, it first started with a riot with taxes, and then it escalated to war. So no, I'm not saying go be a red pillar and go to war. I'm saying we start with finances and taking back our power in the form of what we are funding, and then we can go from there. That's why I'm a proponent of having 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And if you want to figure out what that looks like for you, then you're gonna have to book a call because I don't know what that looks like yet, but I can help you strategize. I don't want you to be fearful of what's coming in the future. What I want to do is to provide people financial sovereignty. You guys have heard me say that so many times. Why? Because when you are financially sovereign, you have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If something happened, you know that if something happened, you're good. You know that where you're putting your money, it will survive a Great Depression. You know that no matter what happens, you're chilling. Not just that, but when you pay off debt and you take back ownership and you're not paying taxes, you're paying it towards yourself, and you have a working business and you are using the system against itself, essentially, you are taking your power back in the form of not owing the banks and not owing the system and using your tax dollars to get you ahead and not some other country, then you have power. Instead of somebody having power over you and telling you what you can and can't say, what you can and can't do, because you're scared that they're gonna come seize your home or seize your property, take away your kids. The legal system can come into your life and completely uproot it. You don't have to play by their game or their rules. You can say what you need to say because you aren't dependent on them. And that's my point that I'm trying to get at, is that it's not to be scared, it's to know that you're good. Your family's good, you're protected. In spite of the shitty system that we are experiencing, you're good. My point here is to address the problems that could scare you and give you the power back so they don't have to.